If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. German Vice Chancellor Lars Klingbeil pledged in Kyiv that Berlin, alongside European allies, is prepared to provide Ukraine with security guarantees to deter future Russian aggression. He emphasized bolstering Ukraine's domestic arms production and said a ceasefire should precede peace talks. Some European states, including Germany, Britain, and France, have suggested sending troops to safeguard Ukraine's borders if a U.S.-backed settlement is reached, though Russia has warned against it. Since 2022, Germany has given Ukraine over 50 billion euros, making it Kyiv's largest supporter in Europe. President Trump said the Ukraine conflict marks a historic shift in warfare, calling it a drone war, rivaling World War II in significance. Speaking with South Korea's president, he noted drones now account for most battlefield casualties and are reshaping combat. The administration is aligning defense policy to embrace unmanned systems, issuing an executive order to boost domestic drone production and ease regulations. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called drones the biggest battlefield innovation in a generation, urging rapid adoption across U.S. forces. Officials say low-cost prototypes are already moving into combat readiness. Australia will invest $10 billion in drones, counter-drone systems, and autonomous technology by 2032, Defense Minister Pat Conroy announced. Project Land 156 will deliver rolling modernization to keep pace with rapid battlefield changes, drawing lessons from Ukraine where drones dominate land, sea, and intelligence operations. Highlighting the MQ-28A Ghostbat, Australia's first homegrown military aircraft in 50 years, Conroy said local industry is central with 200 firms involved. Despite U.S. calls to raise defense spending further, Canberra is sticking with plans to increase defense to 2.3% of GDP by 2034. French Prime Minister François Bayrou has called a September 8th confidence vote after opposition parties rejected his €44 billion austerity plan to cut the deficit, currently 5.8% of GDP. Proposals include scrapping Easter Monday and Victory Day as public holidays, freezing welfare and tax bracket adjustments for inflation, and imposing a solidarity levy on the wealthy. The National Rally, France Unbowed, the Socialists and Greens have vowed to oppose him, calling the plan unfair. If Bayrou loses, his government will collapse, echoing the ouster of Michel Barnier's short-lived cabinet in 2024. Protests dubbed Block Everything are planned for September 10th. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky marked the 34th Independence Day in Kyiv, joined by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, calling for greater global pressure to force Russia into a just peace. He emphasized Ukraine's resilience, noting Russia's mounting losses and insisting peace must preserve dignity and security. Zelensky's remarks followed U.S. President Trump's suggestion that Ukraine expand strikes inside Russia. While both Moscow and Kyiv claim readiness for talks, each accuses the other of blocking negotiations. Zelensky stressed leadership-level talks as the only way forward, stating Ukraine is unafraid of dialogue, but Russia resists meaningful meetings. Nigel Farage announced Reform UK's Operation Restoring Justice, pledging to track down, detain, and deport all illegal migrants in Britain. The plan calls for withdrawing from the European Court of Human Rights, repealing the Human Rights Act, and suspending refugee conventions for 5 years. Migrants would face immediate detention and removal, though a self-deportation scheme offers £2,500 in voluntary flights. Nations refusing return agreements could face visa bans or sanctions. Farage argued only mass deportations will stop channel crossings, citing President Trump's U.S. policies and Australia's turn back the boats.
The public have now just had enough. And what began as a protest of mothers and concerned citizens outside the Bell Hotel in Epping has now spread right across the country.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
And welcome to our lunchtime edition, and thank you for joining us. If you're in the UK, you're probably still snuggled up having a beautiful sleep. You would have had your one day of summer already. In the US, in California, it's early evening. New York, probably thinking about going to bed. And you should. Early to bed keeps you healthy, wealthy, and wise, as my parents used to say. And look at me, I'm as poor as anything. Anyway, before we get into our guest, first guest today, I just want to play some clips and just give you my thoughts on the tragic killing of those two detectives and the wounding of the other policeman in a place called Porpunka, which is near Bright in Victoria. Terrible, terrible, terrible. That's all we can say. And hopefully they'll catch this guy, heavily armed. Question yesterday was brought up: what happened to command of the who were in charge of the police in this area? Why would you send 3 detectives out to a guy's place in the bush, heavily armed, and you have, I think it was an arrest warrant for him? Why wouldn't you send the tactical response group? And that question has not been answered, because what they did, they sent in obviously undermanned bunch of police two were killed. And that is just terrible. But the politicians, they're on to it now. There's no holding back. Far-right extremism, the threat of right-wing extremism, all that. I'll play you this one. This is from Labor MP Tanya Plibersek, who is Plibersek, who's just terrible. I mean, unless she's maintaining true form. Cam, can you play Tanya?
But it is a reminder more broadly, as you say, that the sovereign citizen movement and associated ideologies are a growing risk in Australia and around the world. We're seeing, in Germany we saw an attempted coup, in fact, by a similar sort of ideologically motivated group. Our law enforcement and intelligence personnel take this risk very seriously. The government takes the risk very seriously. ASIO Director has reminded us numerous times that the growing threat of right-wing extremism is something that cannot be ignored in Australia. These are essentially people who think the laws don't apply to them, that they can pick and choose which laws they abide by. That's a very dangerous, slippery slide. When you think that you know better than the police and the courts, and that you are not subject to the police or the courts, you can see how quickly this becomes very dangerous for the people that you live amongst and our community more generally.
What's that got to do with the shooting? I mean, this guy killed 2 policemen. So now we're tarnishing a whole movement. I don't entirely disagree, but at the same time, this was an individual, wasn't the movement that ambushed those police. And Australia's first Muslim MP, Anne Ali, she said the sovereign citizen movement demonstrates a changing nature of terrorism in this country. Cam, can you play terrorism, please?
In terms of the sovereign citizen movement, I think what it demonstrates is the changing nature of terrorism and violent extremism, not just in this country, but worldwide as well. It used to be that you could attach terrorism to a particular ideology in a kind of a linear way. And now what we have is a different landscape of terrorism, where might not be aligned to a singular ideology or a singular political. The thing that I find particularly disturbing is that the sovereign citizens movement is largely embedded in conspiracy theories. Now, terrorism in all its forms, historically and most recently, has always had an element of conspiracy theories. But in a world where we have rising misinformation, disinformation, the capacity of AI to emphasise and increase misinformation and disinformation, conspiracy theories are more and more becoming part of a radicalising narrative for people. So I'm very concerned about the sovereign citizens movement.
Sorry, I don't know what she's on about. It's conspiracy theories, misinformation, and social media algorithms. If I recall correctly, just a while back in New South Wales, the Jewish community was under attack, bomb planted in vehicle on the side of road or something like that. And Shane Healy, who's a friend of ours and used to work with Army intelligence and stuff like that. Very nice guy, very smart guy. Said from the start, it was not terrorism, and it wasn't terrorism. Yet all the politicians jumped on the bandwagon and did not offer an apology, did not say, sorry, we got it wrong, because they knew they were wrong. They were making the most of this time it was just a perceived bad situation. The shootings in Port Punker, I mean, how dare they keep, combining that terrible killing or those terrible killings with the extremism and Nazism and misinformation. It is the government that is providing the misinformation. And then we have Senator Jackie Lambie. Throw a Lambie on the Barbie. But Jackie's ex-military. I think she reached the ranks of corporal or something with the army. She knows a lot about, not much. But anyway, she's labelled sovereign citizens in only the way Jackie Lambie can do, a national security threat. Can you play Lambie, please, Cam?
Yeah, I'll call it. They're becoming a national security problem, to be honest with you. They're on a whole planet in their own world. And it is getting really, really scary. And I do blame a lot of that on the misinformation and disinformation that is going on in social media. Because quite frankly, once they get into that spectrum with the way the algorithms are, it just throws everything else at them. That is a lot of misinformation and it's terribly scary. And I think you'd find that a lot of these people are probably not mentally well, to be brutally honest with you. So it is becoming a problem and the group is getting larger. And something hasn't stopped. And like I said, once we started to go through COVID and went through COVID, my God, the conspiracy theorists out there just blew out of proportion. It's completely out of control.
So social media allows it to flourish, allows people to find like-minded people. And like a lot of things, the evidence we seem to see is that it's all totally unfettered.
Yes, it is unfettered. And the social media they have a part to play in this, and unfortunately, we are not putting the big stick. We are not whacking them, and this will continue. I mean, we're seeing this just on social media. God knows if we can't control this sort of stuff, what does AI look like in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time? I mean, for goodness sake, we're pulling our kids off that are under 16 by the end of the year. We have a problem, but they're not using that big stick to whack those social media companies. I don't give a stuff if you close them down, but they are becoming a real problem, and people are getting hurt because of them. And they're not taking any responsibility nor any of their actions.
There you are. I'm sure my guest will be wondering how the hell did you get to corporal? Sorry, he's not here at the moment. He's just in the background.
He's wondering.
I'll come back to you in a second, Grant. I mean, it just encourages you never to visit Australia. She's floating around. She lives in Tasmania, by the way, so maybe, I don't know. Jackie Lambie is truly. But the common thread here, and I'll ask Grant about this too, common thread is to control the internet. It's to stop and a lot of people use free speech very liberally, but they're allowed to because it's free speech, I suppose. But it is to do with, I mean, look at what happened in COVID. You were not allowed to bounce ideas off each other. Scientists were told to shut up. And that's why we had that fiasco at the end of the day. And the same thing with this, to stop the internet, to control, as she said, we need to control it with a big stick. I think we should send her to Washington. I think her and Trump would I love to watch World Championship Wrestling, Jackie Lambie and Donald Trump. Sorry, and it's terrible, but it's a terrible thing. This poor punker, this dreadful situation with the police there. I mean, that's just terrible. But to notice how they've jumped on the bandwagon. They're going to control the internet. Misinformation. Stop it. What we need to do is talk to someone intelligent. Grant Newsham, are you intelligent?
Pretty sure the guy you're going to have on after me is, but I'll do my best.
Thank you. I mean, I was watching your reaction to Jackie Lambie. But take away the accent. She's no different than a lot of your senators in the federally and state-wise.
Oh, we got a few. Yeah, we could see them and raise them one, though she seemed right up there with the top. I'm not sure if we could outdo her, but we've got a few. AOC comes immediately to mind.
She's great.
But we got just a long list of them. We have some very good ones, but um, as they take away the accent, and we hear similar things about that. It all comes down to power. People who think they know better than everyone and want to make sure that everyone stays in line. So it's nothing we haven't heard, but the big stick is that sort of got my attention from the corporal.
Well, I thought you were rap dancing at one stage. You were just rolling on the floor, laughing. But anyway, enjoying your English tea, of course,
That's right.
in downtown Honolulu. Or at Kahala, probably at Kahala. That's where you would be. Lovely part of the world too. And if you haven't been to Hawaii, you need to go there and go to Oahu. Right way to pronounce it, isn't it? Oahu. And pop down to Kahala. This is where Grant lives. Magnificent part of the world. Anyway, the Australia relations with Iran at the moment are fairly well. They're not very good at all, are they? The Australia, Israel, and Iran relations. How do we? Because we're still going to have, even though they had had a few bombs to encourage them to, to see the way that a great part of the world was seeing. How do we mend these relations with Iran? And it's very interesting here because Netanyahu had sent a letter which we displayed the other day, and it's floating around saying that he wants the government to do more on anti-Semitism. And I agree. I don't think we should attack any race, regardless. And we mustn't forget, even if you don't like what's happening in the Middle East, which I don't, I'm dead against it. It doesn't represent the people. I mean, it represents the government and maybe a number of those that support the government, but it's a government action. So anti-Semitism, I think, needs to be stamped out as any sort of racial hate speech. Having said that, when the Prime Minister of Israel sends a letter to our Prime Minister saying, by September 23, I want this to happen, that would sort of reflect or insinuate, wouldn't it, in a way, that this guy wants what he wants and you better do it. And so I go back to the relationship between Iran and Australia and the US and Israel. How do we mend this? How do we get back to some sort of speakeasy sort of thing?
Well, with Iran, you never will until there's a new government in place. I remember when Khomeini went back to Iran in 1979. That was a long time ago. And ever since then, U.S. administrations have been looking for the moderate Iranian to deal with. He doesn't exist. You're as likely to find the Yeti. Nothing's changed. The only thing that works is, I suppose, that Australian corporal's big stick. Sort of half joking, but that's the only time you really ever get anywhere with Iran, is this maximum pressure. But the idea that somehow there's a deal to be cut, that these wonderful Persians will come out of the woodwork and we'll all get back to living normally, it's just not going to happen with these people in charge. And the idea somehow that, well, the only way that Iran can be governed is by these, the mullahs, these corrupt mullahs, and that can't ever be anything better than that. Well, that's pretty condescending towards the Iranians, but it's going to take force and it's a pressure, and nothing else will work with that. But the idea of having a better relationship with them, and I've been watching this for over 45 years now, I just don't see that happening. And there's a lot of people in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East, who would like something to change in Iran. They're sort of waiting for someone else to go first, like the Americans and the Israelis. I didn't even know the Australians had a relationship with the Iranians. So that surprised me. And one might ask, well, what'd you get out of that for all that long?
Not much. I got some nice dates and coffee, I would imagine, tea. The US relationship at the moment with Australia isn't damaged, but it would appear that the US is looking for a little more from our current government, which is the Labor government. Would you agree with that? And how do we mend the broken bridges?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I think the American sort of impression of Australia is probably 20 years out of date, maybe even longer. In some respects, it goes back, for some of us, it goes back to 1942. At least we've heard about it, when the Australians stopped the Japanese on the Kokoda Track. That was a certain type of Australian, and we tend to think that that's what all Australians are like. And particularly if you were in the military and you've dealt with the Australian military, you get an impression of them. But there does seem to be a sort of a pretty big slice of really anti-Americanism, anti-military sort of thought within the Australian sort of political class. Academic class is probably completely lost. And I'd say there's a skepticism towards the United States, if not outright dislike, that one sometimes feels. How do you get around that? I don't really know, but you do hope that sort of the cooler heads, that the wiser people can kind of keep a lid on things and have us continuing to operate together and to see that we are at the end of the day friends. But when you have people complaining about getting too close to the Americans and therefore Australia loses its sovereignty, well, then you've got some problems. And I say I don't quite know how we get out of that.
Yeah, Labor Party has always had a sort of an entirely anti-US or anti-US attitude, but it's always been there, hasn't it? And it seems to be a little more prominent, and that I would imagine be because of the ongoing conflict around the world and possible conflict in the future. And it was just recently, I think the US reached out to Australia to see where they would stand if there was a stoush with China over Taiwan. Have you heard any more about that? What our reaction was? Was it positive, or do you think it would have been positive, or do you think I think last time you said it's a wait and see. Do you think it still is a wait and see?
I'm afraid it is. I think with the sort of a previous administration, I think they did say, yeah, of course we're going to be in on it. But I gather that the Albanese has not spoken about it, and you really never quite know what's going to come around. The Australians seem to have something called the Australian straddle that I read about, where they want to rely on the Americans to protect them, but they want to rely on China for their economic prosperity. Well, that's a neat trick if you can pull it off. And I don't think they're going to be able to. So it's really not clear exactly what Australia would do. I think the US side either hopes and probably assumes that somehow at the end of the day, Australia will show up, both with its forces and political support as well. But it does seem to depend on who's in office or who's in power in Canberra. Mm-hmm. And I think there are some doubts now. We just don't know.
There's some skepticism about the role of Iran in orchestrating anti-Semitic attacks in Australia. Do you have your thoughts on that? I mean, it happened. I mean, again, a letter rolls up from Bibi. There's some reaction now with the booting out of the Iran ambassador, and also the staff all packed up and went home. We've been warned that we shouldn't go to Iran, which you don't need a warning from a government to tell you that. But all that sort of thing. It just... We had a guy on yesterday. He was saying it doesn't feel quite right. Are we playing games? And on whose side are we playing games?
No, we're not playing games at all. I think Mike Burgess is a serious guy, that to start with. Now go back to the 1980s when the Iranians grabbed Bill Buckley, the CIA station chief in Lebanon, tortured him to death over the course of at least a year. And they sent videos of it back to the United States to show us what they were doing. That pretty much gives you a benchmark for considering what the Iranians are like. And they've been doing that sort of thing to other people for a long, long time. So what they're accused of now is orchestrating these attacks on sort of Jewish targets in Australia. I have no trouble believing that. I'd be astonished if they weren't doing it. And when I said about Australia being a very different place than a lot of us thought it was, when you have 100,000 people sort of marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge, calling for blood, for Jewish blood, now you've got a problem. And remember, a couple of days after the October 7th sort of campaign of murder and rape that Hamas launched against Israeli civilians, 2 days after that or so, on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, you had people calling to gas the Jews, etc. And what did the Australian government do about that? Nothing. So you've got some problems here. And so the Iranians, I say you could probably take them out of the mix and you still have the same thing going on. But in terms of the Iranians being the people who do this sort of thing, I say look up the Bill Buckley case, and that'll give you some sense of what sort of people we're dealing with. And it's not all Persians. Unfortunately, many of the more sane ones live in Los Angeles now. But things do have a way of changing. And that regime, remember, almost came down in about 2010 during the Green Revolution. And all it would have taken was a word of encouragement from the United States administration, the Obama administration. They said nothing, and the Iranian regime got control of things. They used Ericsson, the Swedish telecommunications company's technology, actually to take apart the protest. So what the Iranian ambassador was accused of, I'm pretty sure they've got the evidence on him.
On the weekend, we had rallies right across the country again, and there were like 350, 400,000. And most of those, the people like myself, just want to stop killing people, just stop it. And and I have not a problem with that. We do though have, there's a small section, or I don't know how small they are, but there are some numbers, and they appear to be wanting to, like you would see in the US and the mainland and other parts of the world, they want to do damage to not only the government, they want to do damage to Western society. And I think the last thing on their mind is what the entire march was about in the first place. So I think you are right, that it is a real problem. Our government, though, seems to be, what's the word? Very not wishy-washy, very weak. Because I do recall that protest, burn them, stone them, do all sorts of terrible things to the Jewish people, and nothing happened to them. Yet, if you were to say to someone who was transgender, for example, you're not a she, you're a he, you'd be arrested. Do you think there's something wrong with our politics here?
Oh, it's kind of insane. I remember watching, actually. Well, I do follow the politics enough, and you do have the range of sort of appeasers and sort of hardcore leftists who, straight out of the 1960s. But watching actually the response to COVID, that is really what opened my eyes. That this is a different Australia. I didn't know that they would roll over so freely to that kind of sort of East German regime intimidation and bullying. So it's something that has surprised a lot of us. And sometimes if you let a problem fester for too long, it gets really hard to change course or to crack down on it. And you get the other side gets the numbers, the momentum, and then you get an administration in power that doesn't want to get anyone angry, or at least get those people angry, because they're really a source of votes, campaign funding, what have you. And it is a volatile brew for even a sort of a nice country like Australia. But as I say, that protest on the Sydney Opera House steps, and the more recent thing across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and the numerous attacks on Jewish targets, I really feel sorry. I don't know how a Jewish person could live in Australia and actually feel safe about things. But so you let these things go on, and then you've got a problem. And how do you deal with it? Well, it's going to take somebody with some nerve, and I'm not sure that at least the people that I see in charge now have got it.
No, Richard Marles was in Washington this week. Nobody would have known that, but he did get because he went there to have a meeting with Hegseth and J.D. Vance, and he finally got a photo op for his Instagram account. It says a lot about the importance at the moment the administration there is placing on the Australian government. What sort of sleight of hand is that? Is that because it would seem to be we're sending you a message. If you want to have a meeting with us and you want to talk Turkey and whatever, you need to, as Donald Trump would say, show a little more respect. That's how I see it anyway. And for Richard Marles not to be able to have a meeting with Hegseth, and he tried 20 odd times to get it, and finally got his picture with J.D. Vance and Hegseth. It says a lot, doesn't it?
I'm afraid it does. This is sort of Charles Bronson giving you the back of his hand. This is not very good treatment. It is embarrassing because we do have a good relationship in most respects with Australia. And for some reason, they've lost their wasta in the last couple of years. I don't know if they should have replaced, Australia should have replaced its ambassador in Washington. I think when you've called Mr. Trump during the first term, when he was out of office, I think, the village idiot, you probably should have replaced him. But something's missing, and I don't know what it
There
is.
is. It's something between the ears, my father would say. He'd say,
Yeah.
look down at my feet and say, they're for dancing and that's for thinking. Don't get them mixed up. But I think it's we should get used to this, because if we are going to start to favour our Asian neighbours, in particular China, a little more than we should be, because it's our decision. But if it contravenes or is different to what, for example, the US is thinking, we have to expect these things. And you are right. I mean, when I used to live in the US, I was always told by people there that they were getting a little tired of being the police of the world, because whenever there was a stoush, you needed the American there. And otherwise, you did nothing else but can the Americans and say terrible things about them and their country. So I think Donald Trump, and I do think he is floundering a bit on the international stage. However, I think he has the right idea, the fact that if you want to do business, you want to come into our house, you need to show a little more respect. And I think that's not a bad attitude to have. What do you think?
No, I think it's about time. That's just human nature. I think we all sort of grow up learning manners, and if you want something from somebody, well, you act politely to them. In Australia's case, well, it surprised me that the Prime Minister has not approached Washington and said, "Look, we're rolling in rare earth minerals. We want to be your main source of these, and here's how we're going to do it." And if you did that, then that would get somebody in the administration's attention, and Mr. Trump's as well. And you got to stop the gratuitous sort of assaults or insults, and sometimes bite your tongue. That's just the way life is. But Australia has a good offer to make, and instead of getting immediately resentful at what Mr. Trump is trying to do, you should say, well, what is it we need to do that's going to win him over, that's going to help Australia? And Australia's got a huge contribution to make, in a lot of ways, I'd say for the free world in particular. But this idea of somehow sort of having an equal, sort of balanced relationship between Australia and China, that's just not going to work. It's either one or the other. And if Australia wants to start learning Mandarin, well, go ahead. But if you want to stick with the free nations, well, that would be the best way to do it. And what I would like to do, and I think it'd be good if the Australian diplomats in Washington, who think America's not doing enough or is heavy-handed or doesn't appreciate Australia, and kind of make it a little hard for us to do some things militarily in Australia while expecting us to come and defend Australia. They ought to go out to places like Youngstown, Ohio, or Erie, Pennsylvania, that are depressed and where a lot of people have children who join the military, and go make their case. I'd like to see Kevin Rudd, the ambassador, go out there and sort of explain why Donald Trump is the village idiot. But I'm being a little funny. It's unfortunate because these are two countries that have a good relationship, and it's sort of well earned. And they have a huge contribution to make, both countries, to each other and to the region, really to freedom ultimately. That's what it's about. And we shouldn't be sort of at this level. So one likes to be optimistic, but sometimes it takes a little while for things to work out.
Yeah, even the media, local media or national media.
Oh, goodness, yeah. I used to read the Sydney papers, well, all the papers when I was down there. And my goodness, they don't like America very much. You read this stuff and you'd almost say, well, okay, fellas, we love you, but, take on China yourself.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is. There's a few exceptions, but not many. And
that goes back to what I was saying before about the, you guys get tired of being the police force of the world. And, if you're going to, all policemen like also to get a pat on the back and a thank you. And you're not asking for much at this stage. Just one more thing, your thoughts, because you mentioned Kevin Rudd. We probably have the same thought. Do you think, how long has he been ambassador or been in the New York now? It's been like, must be 5 years, 6 years now. I mean, do you think there should be a time that you say, okay, you've had your taste of the big life, time to move on? Or do you think they gain maturity, but not with Kevin, but they gain maturity and they get better with age if they keep that job? What do you think?
Oh, I think he probably should have left a while ago. It probably depends on the ambassador, and I think you pretty much know from day one how good they're going to be. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but you generally have a feeling, and there are ambassadors you wish would stay longer. Australia's had some very good ones before the current one, who were excellent and just did really a wonderful job. But I think this, everybody has a sort of a job for which they're best suited, and perhaps being the ambassador at this time in Washington is maybe not, in my opinion, the one that Ambassador Rudd should be holding. There must be something else where he could excel even more.
Well, the downside of setting him back is that we get him, so that would not do relations at all any good at all.
Yeah, we'll just send over Bob Carr, please.
We'll send over Jackie Lambie.
Could you? Yeah.
I quote, got a big stick.
Well, there's some people on. She can have lunch in the Democrat side of the house, in particular, who'd really like her.
No, it is love. I mean, she's very scary. I got to tell you, she scares the crap out of me. And she was a corporal, and I don't know if they gave her a gun. I'm not too sure of that bit. Anyway,
if it was an SAS corporal, that's one thing.
No,
I suspect it wasn't.
I think she used to drive trucks or in the transport or in the cooking department, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, if somebody wants to find out more about your latest writings and yourself, how do they do that, Grant?
I'm on X. It's Newsham Grant, capital N, capital G, and grantnewsham.com. You can find everything that I write and all the interviews I do, where I try to offend as many people as I can in 9 minutes.
And I see that, as always, Honolulu, the weather is about 31 degrees Celsius today. Absolutely magnificent. Is it good for a cup of tea?
It's always good for a cup of tea, especially if you're out in Kahala. Life's good out there.
It's my favourite part of the world, Oahu and Hawaii and Kahala. I mean, if I ever win lotto, I'd go either there or the Gold Coast on Oahu. That's just below Diamond Head, and it's a magnificent part of the world. And I'm green with envy, but never mind. I'll get over it. Grant Newsham, thank you very much. This is The World Today.
Hi, my name is Morgan Georgioff. I'm from the United States and I serve in the galley. After culinary school, I started working in the tough environment of fine dining. It was great for my skills, but not as great for my spiritual life. I felt like the Lord was calling me to cook for the people who needed to be fed instead of those who wanted to be fed. So I Googled cooking for Jesus internationally, and that led me here to Mercy Ships. Many members of my team are national workers from whatever country we're serving in. Getting to learn and live in a new culture alongside its people has opened my eyes to just how much love and hope can change lives and what being the hands and feet of Jesus really feels like. Every single person on this ship needs food to be successful in their roles. And while knowing that my job impacts every single life on this vessel is a big responsibility, it is also such a pleasure to get to use the talents God has given me to help change lives.
Not the station for people who label truth as misinformation just because they don't like it.
For facts and truth.
Today's News Talk. The World Today.
Grant Newsham was our guest, by the way. Enjoyed the conversation very, very much too of him, and he takes quite a pragmatic view of things and backed up with a lot of experience. Robbie Barwick is a long-time executive member of the Australian Citizens Party. He's the party's media spokesman, national research director, editor of the Australian Alert Service, and presenter of the weekly show, The Citizens Report. Robbie, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Mike. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Your thoughts on the expulsion of Iran's ambassador?
Well, I might have a pretty different view to your previous guest, Mike. In fact, I was taking notes on. I could spend our segment contradicting what he was saying on everything. But anyway, we'll put that aside for now. Full disclosure: I met with the ambassador 3 weeks ago, and I met with him because I was with the former Australian ambassador to Iran, Mr. John Lander, who was the first Australian ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran, Iran after the 79 revolution. We re-established relations with Iran in 85, and John Lander was the first ambassador from 85 to 88. So we were invited and he's a member of the Citizens Party now, we were invited by the Iranian ambassador to meet with him. And he was a gentleman. We had a great chat about the Australia-Iranian relationship. And the one thing I will talk about, I will contradict your previous guest on. I don't value his opinions very highly if he didn't know, as he admitted to you, that Australia has had an excellent relationship with Iran. And Mike, this is very relevant to understanding what happened on Monday, because that relationship was not just something that Australia did of its own volition, although there's aspects of it that were truly sovereignly in our interest, such as with the grain trade. It was also a service to the United States. The United States used us for the last 4 decades as a back channel to Iran, because despite America being the great Satan and Iran being in the Americans' views, the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism, which is rubbish. And I can talk about that if you want. Despite these two countries seemingly being enemies, and they are enemies, Iran only has one enemy, which is the United States of America. Well, probably two, actually, Israel, I suppose. Despite that, America and Iran have dealings together, such as, for instance, Iran buys Boeing aircraft for its airline industries, and someone has to facilitate that. And Australia has been one of the go-betweens, and a significant one, for a long time. And so when the Australian government takes the step of expelling the ambassador, as they have, that tells me that they did this either with the Americans' permission or under American orders, because they would not have done it otherwise, given the role that we have played all these years. And it's just an interesting example of how foreign relations work sometimes. Australia has always been publicly chest beating about Iran. We've engaged in all the same condemnation as all the other countries, but a lot of that was just for show. Behind the scenes, we maintained a good relationship. So I think that's quite important to know, because then if we did it either with their permission or under orders, the question is, where did the pretext come from to do it? And that's what people should be demanding in response to ASIO's announcement.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused. I saw that letter it was posted on a bunch of socials from supposedly Netanyahu to the Australian Prime Minister, giving a end date of September 23, I think it was.
Yep.
And then we saw what happened with Iran, and the ASIO. They found out that they've been creating all these anti-Semitic attacks, blah 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 blah. So I saw all that, and you think, okay, they were jumping to Netanyahu's or Bibi's tune. How high can I jump, sir? But if you look on the other side of the coin, by the way, I am no supporter of the Australian government. However, their stance when it comes to Gaza, even though seems to be a lot of hot air and just words, is that they're full on, and I agree with what they're saying, is to stop the killing, stop this to Israel, and they're making themselves quite loud and very vocal, and insisting that we go to, I think it's a 2-state policy, and to make sure that they have their own sovereignty and land and all that sort of stuff. So I see all that, So we have two sides. If they were on the side of Israel, I can understand them booting out the that. I don't agree with it, but I can understand why they did that. But if they're vocal to the umpteenth degree in criticising Israel, that would be contrary to what they've done now. So I don't understand that. And you are right. The piece I see that's missing from this is the United States. How do you read it?
Well, look, Albanese has been incredibly disappointing to the segment of the Australian population that has supported Palestine. Incredibly disappointing, because he came from that segment of the population. He was a vocal member of the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine and the pro-Palestine faction of the Labor Party, etc. But in government, he has been very disappointing. Now, a year ago, I had a meeting with a member of Parliament who was also in the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine and in the Labor Party, and I asked her what has happened to Albanese. And her answer I found incredibly revealing, Mike. This was verbatim. She said, he still has the same views, but as leader, he has to prove his loyalty to the United States. Not his friendliness to Israel, his loyalty to the United States. That was her response. Now, I also last week spoke to another Labor member of Parliament who is pro-Palestine, and there's been a year between the two conversations. This person said to me he is from a standpoint inside the Labor Party. While the people outside the Labor Party have been very frustrated how slow Labor has moved, he knows how glacial was Labor's movements before, and he thinks this has been the last 12 months. Things have moved quite rapidly to the point where the very thing that Bob Carr had a public fight with Julia Gillard about in 2010, which was not that Julia Gillard wanted Australia to vote no to Palestinian recognition. Well, it wasn't even recognition. Palestine having observer status at the UN. She wanted to vote no. Bob Carr wanted to vote yes, because it's just observer status, not recognition. But he at least insisted that Australia should abstain, and he's written about this in his books about it. That was far more given how controversial that was in 2010. The fact that in 2025 Albanese has now promised recognition, or seemingly, it's got some conditions on it, but Penny Wong has indicated it's definitely going to go ahead in September at the UN. That's a big shift, right? To where we're now joining the 146 other countries that recognise Palestine, and so this is something you've got to take stock of. Now, how does that come about? Well, the size of the protests have something to do with it. Clearly, historically, this is true. These things do move the dial. I referenced a second ago my friend John Lander. John Lander is in his 80 now. He was a young diplomat in DFAT in the early 1970s when Jim Cairns was leading the big anti-Vietnam War moratorium marches. And he tells how, as an official in DFAT, he and other people of like mind responded internally to those big protests and said, no, we've got to help. We've got to agitate here internally to change Australia's policy on Vietnam, right? That's an example of how they can work. So, and the protests, the Sydney Harbour Bridge protest was huge. The protests on the marches last weekend were even bigger, and Albanese has shifted. But Albanese seems to have this pattern, both with Israel and with China, that he'll do something that is actually quite strong, even though he's such a timid, cautious politician, seemingly. He'll do something that's actually quite strong, and then he always seems to balance it with something on the other side, right? And so what was striking in the media today is when he said it is not the role of the government to question its intelligence agencies. Are you kidding me?
Oh,
we are in the post-Iraq war period.
Mm.
It absolutely is the role of the government to question the intelligence agencies, but it is politically expedient for him to just accept what they said, take this seemingly strong action against the Iranian ambassador, because Iran is an easy target diplomatically, and look like he is balanced in his handling of the Israel issue.
But with that comment, though, would also intimate that there is a deep state within Australia.
Oh, yes.
So tell me this: we vote, and I think we voted badly. I think they told lies, but Labor Party, Labor government's in power. They're the ones that are taking us forward, without vomiting here. Surely for Albanese to say this, wouldn't this would mean that Albanese is probably out of his depth?
Well, he's clearly not a. It would be better if he was a stronger person, for sure. But can I say there's a much deeper, more long-standing problem here, and we know a lot about this. We've done a lot of research in this. The original sin, if you will, of the cause of the deep state was a decision taken immediately after World War II, led by the British. The British approached their key allies, the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and essentially demanded we all set up standalone intelligence agencies. Up to that point, intelligence was a function of, you had police intelligence, you had military intelligence. Intelligence is important, clearly. But the British had more than that. They had MI5 and MI6, and they wanted us to have the same thing. And they said, we can't share intelligence with you. We've got this Cold War threat unless you do it. And what they were setting up by doing that was an apparatus that, by definition, because it's allowed to operate clandestinely, by definition operates outside of political accountability. Now, you can do it in such a way that you have some form of political accountability. The American committee system in the Congress has the Intelligence Committee has oversight over the CIA, etc. But that can be manipulated. The British oversight over its agencies is incredibly weak. There's barely any oversight. Ours is also very weak. When Ben Chifley was asked to set up ASIO in 1949, he point blank refused. He said, "I don't want a secret police here." But through some manipulation, he was eventually cajoled into doing it. But there was a healthy skepticism at first by the Australian politicians. They didn't accept what these intelligence agencies just said. They were a new phenomenon, right? And they tended to demand evidence. And there were some interesting stories in those first few years in the context of the Cold War. But generations later, you have a lot less skepticism, and even though there should be a lot more because we're in the post-Iraq War period. This is what was mind-boggling to me. I quote Paul Keating. Now, this is not because of Paul Keating's particular views, but I don't know Paul Keating, but I knew Malcolm Fraser. He would have shared this view. And what I find there's an older generation of politicians in Australia, ex-politicians, who express views that come from a standpoint of seeing Australia as much more sovereign and independent. They were always pro-American, but they're not as slavishly sycophantic as this current lot of politicians are. And Paul Keating in 2017, in commenting on the hype around China that was just erupting in Australian politics, and he was talking about the people who were influencing Malcolm Turnbull's policy, he identified ASIO as a key source of disinformation. And he said, this is a quote, "When the intelligence agencies are running your foreign policy, the nutters are in charge." Because, Mike, they don't deal. John Brennan, the CIA chief, famously said in 2017 in testimony to the US Congress, "I deal in intelligence, not evidence." And we saw with Iraq what you can manipulate intelligence into. And in fact, the Iraq case shows that how politicized intelligence is. This is how the deep state works. Right now, Tulsi Gabbard is raking over the coals of Russiagate and showing how politicized that was. I cited this in our publication yesterday because I was expressing the skepticism about ASIO's claims about Iran. And I gave the example of the fact that Andrew Wilkie quit the Office of National Assessments over the Iraq War WMD claims in 2003. And there was actually a parliamentary inquiry in 2004 into why the ONA suddenly changed its assessment, because it initially downplayed the threat of Iraq WMDs, but it suddenly changed its assessment to align with MI6 and the CIA. and it was purely political. And that's before we can't tell all the evidence, Mike. You and I won't be able to figure out what's really going on in this conversation. But what we can state emphatically is nobody should take what Mike Burgess at ASIO says at face value. That is nuts in this post-Iraq war climate.
It's interesting. One of our guests is Robert Gregory, the president of the Jewish Association of Australia, or something like that. But he's a nice guy, by the way. He has been saying that they've been telling Albanese about Iran, for such a long time. Why would Albanese act now?
Well, so part of the commentary is that there's a suspicion that there's another round of attack on Iran coming. Certainly, it's not even really the Israelis. The Netanyahu regime that controls Israel, they are gunning for this. They are, what they've been trying to do ever since October 7 is turn it into a general regional war in which the United States has to be involved. Mm-hmm. That's been Netanyahu's strategy. Now, he has to deal with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is clearly someone who can seemingly be easily manipulated if you flatter him enough. But on the other hand, he does keep coming back to this idea he doesn't want wars, right? So he bombed, Israel set it up so that Donald Trump seemingly had to bomb Iran. Donald Trump, the rest of the world was so skeptical about what that accomplished, but Donald Trump chose to interpret it as the most successful bombing in the history of the world, right? Because that gave him the out to stop it. Okay, it's over now. We've done it. Fixed.
Big, beautiful bombing.
Big, beautiful bombing. Problem solved. And so it's not an automatic thing that Donald Trump is going to commit to what Netanyahu would really want him to commit to. So that's one view. And maybe this is part of it. If the foreign partners that Mike Burgess cited as the source of this intelligence included Mossad, which the Israeli press are pretty much boasting it did. No one has emphatically confirmed that yet, but there's a lot of speculation, open speculation in the Israeli press that it included Mossad. Then what we might be seeing here is what is called manufacturing consent, right? Ramping up the demonization of Iran, because that then contributes to a goal that's coming. Because why people are so skeptical, and this is a big issue. This is the big story of this week. It's not the announcement. It's how skeptical the Australian public is. Those people that have been taken to the streets lately marching for Palestine, they're not going to readily believe what has just been announced. Christine Milne, the former leader of the Greens, tweeted something I thought was quite interesting and accurate this morning. She noted that unlike the UK, which had the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq war lies, Australia, we told as many lies as anybody. We were part of that whole crime too. There has never been an accounting here about those lies, ever. And she tied that to the skepticism that's greeted Mike Burgess now, right? And that's an interesting phenomenon. But just to get to the alternative to whether it's a bigger future thing that they're planning, there is this element where it just may serve Albanese's purposes, which is why he agreed to it, to look like he is balanced with his policy when it comes to Israel and Palestine. It actually may serve that. Or it may be just a way to try and use the deep state networks in Australia to try and stop us from or slow down or bring us back from that position that Albanese has sort of gone out on a limb on recognition of Palestine, hopefully bring it back a bit. I mean, that's speculation, but that's all we've got to go on at the moment.
Just wrapping up, Grant Newsham said that, and we intimated, and I agree, there's a fair bit of mending needs to be done at the moment between the US and Australia if we want them to, and I used to find this in the States, they were very tired of being the world police, but they are the world police because they're the biggest in the Western world. And he made reference to Kevin Rudd as the ambassador, and I think he was suggesting, as many of us have, that maybe Kevin Rudd should come back to Brisbane, which is just, very horrible thought because we're not far from Brisbane. What's your thoughts just quickly on the ambassador? Because to have a good relationship between both governments, the US and Australia, you've got to have that person at the middleman, the person at the front of the troops, which is.
Well, I do have a very different view on this. I think that's an extremist position in America. If Kevin Rudd is up to their liking, that's only because there's a neocon faction that don't like Trump either. I would suspect, knowing I follow Grant Newsham on Twitter, I would suspect that he also doesn't like Trump because he is pro-war. Trump is anti-war. I'll state that. He can come back on here and contradict me if he wants. Kevin Rudd is the biggest US sycophant in Australian politics and always has been. In 2003, when Mark Latham called the Liberal Party of Congolina suckholes to George Bush, Kevin Rudd raced up to the American embassy with a gift to apologise on his behalf. Kevin Rudd, when Simon Crean opposed the Iraq War in 2003, and remember he was at odds with his own Labor international star Tony Blair to oppose that war, and he was right to oppose that war. He was vindicated by history. He had to argue in the caucus with Kevin Rudd, Kim Beazley and Michael Danby because they were arguing vehemently for the war. Kevin Rudd is as pro-American as the Americans are ever going to get. The flip side of that, Mike, where's the American ambassador in Australia? Do you know who that is? We don't have one. We don't have one because that's how much they treat us as toadies. They don't need one here. So sorry, Mr. Newsham, America get its own house in order, get an ambassador here, treat us with some respect, right? Because what he said about we should be nice to the United States if we want something, he was effectively saying we've got to kiss the ring. Yet when our biggest trading partner, the country we make the most money from in the world, was being absolutely insulted day after day by Scott Morrison during COVID and before COVID, and finally said enough, that was called economic coercion. So I'm sick of this. You've pushed my button. I apologise. I go off on this. I think there's an extremist element which he speaks for, because I do follow him on Twitter. And these Americans who just do not have any self-reflection at all about their role in the world causing trouble, they need to have a long, hard look at themselves. Australia, as far as I'm concerned, Australia needs to be a sovereign country, and we do not need America to police the world. We should support Trump in that. What you need is a multipolar world where the big powers, we encourage them to get on with each other. Australia should play an intermediate role in that. They've got a lot more in common than should make them enemies, but there's a military-industrial complex that makes a lot of money out of them being enemies. And those people and their neocon spokespeople, we have to, in this 21st century of non-stop war, it's time we call them out.
Always a pleasure, and I'm not disagreeing at all. I'm just probing. I'm probing, as the proctologist would say. Just quickly, if somebody wants to find out more about you and the Australian Citizens Party and how to have a bit of a chin wag with you, I think that would.
Well, you can follow me on X, where I'm often having pot shots at Grant Newsham at Robbie Barwick. Citizens, our website citizensparty.org.au, and we have a weekly YouTube show, but we also do interviews on it called Citizens Insight, and that's just the Australian Citizens Party on YouTube, and you can follow our weekly subscribe to our weekly show there.
I think we need to make lunchtime a bit more exciting. I might have you both on, if you wouldn't mind. Have an open discussion.
Play this tape, and I'm up to it because I took notes, and I'll take up every single point.
I'm just going to be rugged up in all sorts of bulletproof vest and all that sort of stuff, so I'll be safe. Always a pleasure, Robbie. Thank you very much for your time. Robert Barwick, Director of the Australian Citizens Party. This is The World Today.